reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately, he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters in the Lord, one sport that I have enjoyed throughout the years is water skiing. Believe it or not, I learned to water ski with a priest, Father Hubert Brew, who was the pastor at St. George Church in Baton Rouge for many, many years. And since I went to LSU, I started water skiing at that time. I would go with him and other friends. And when you learn to water ski, one of the first things you have to do is get a little theoretical lesson as to what water skiing involves. And one of the first things they always tell you is, don't pull yourself out. Let the boat pull you out. And of course, then you have to get in the water with the skis on, and then you feel the pressure of the water coming at you, sinking you under the water, and guess what is the first thing you do? You pull yourself out, and you learn the lesson the hard way because you go head first, and trust me, even water at that speed feels like concrete. It hits you hard, so you feel the water. And there's something like that in the readings today. We have Bartimaeus, the blind man. He's a great teacher. So he teaches us certain things, but he not only teaches us by theoretically telling us something, but by his actions, by what he does in the gospel today. And throughout the Archdiocese, we've been focusing today on the Eucharistic prayer, kind of explaining a little bit what the Eucharistic prayer is all about in the different parts of the Mass. And in a way, Bartimaeus, he's leading us to the truth, who is Jesus of Nazareth himself. And in a way, the Eucharistic prayer at Mass is like the core, it's like the center of the Mass, because it leads us to Christ himself, the truth. So the Eucharistic prayer, so that you know, is what we do from when we say the introduction to the preface. When I say, "The Lord be with you, lift up your hearts, let us give thanks to the Lord our God," that part, and then the preface that ends in the Holy Holy, and then we have certain options for the prayer of consecration, and that goes all the way to the doxology right before the Our Father. But if you look at the Mass, that's kind of like the core. That's the center, of course. We have the works of consecration, where the transubstantiation, the changing of the wine and the bread into the body, blood of Christ happens. But that is not only the most important part of the Mass, but it is a part of the Mass that gives a lot of teaching. If you would be listening to who we're praying to and what we're saying, it gives you a lot of teaching, and each prayer is a little different. Some prayers emphasize or mention things that the others do not, but it's a beautiful mosaic of truth, of doctrinal truths. And I would like to present bartimaeus in a way as an example of that, leading us to the truth and how he does it. And I thought of three things that bartimaeus, the good teacher he is, can teach us today. The first thing, as we heard in the gospel, he is very bold. He sees this opportunity as Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. This is my chance. And he thinks probably that I may not have another chance like this, that I need to go for it. And you know, when we read the gospel, we need to be kind of gentle, and we need to, you know, we're proclaiming the word, but trust me, bartimaeus, when he actually shouted to Jesus, he didn't sound like I sounded reading the gospel. He probably sounded more like, Jesus of Nazareth, have pity on me! And he kept shouting and shouted to the point that he was obnoxious. They were telling him, be silent, get out of the way. Don't shout like that. But he caught Jesus' attention because he knew this was his opportunity. This was his chance. And you know, one interesting thing I saw when I was preparing for the homily, if you remember some of the readings that we've had recently of the Gospel of Mark, there are some similarities or some connections. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we heard about the rich young man. And Marx is just the rich man. He wasn't young according to Mark. He had lived all the commandments from his youth. But if you remember, he really had a hard time giving up his wealth. He couldn't give his wealth because he had many riches. And Jesus uses that opportunity to teach. But notice bartimaeus. Mark tells us that the moment that Jesus calls him, what did he do? He put aside his cloak, he sprang up and went to Jesus. And what was the cloak? You see, the cloak, for a blind man, he was begging by the side of the road. So in the cloak, he had his possessions. Whatever coins they were giving him, he had them in his cloak. That's what it was for. So he puts everything aside. He takes a risk. He goes for it. He doesn't stay sitting down. He springs up and he goes to Jesus. And I think it's a great lesson for us, because a lot of times we kind of hold back. You know, psychologists, they tell us we only use a very small percentage of our potential. We're always kind of holding back. This time of pandemic, without downplaying the pandemic, because it is real, but think about it, if we're honest, we can justify a lot of things on the pandemic. Well, I cannot do that because of the pandemic. Or we need to cancel that because of the pandemic. And everything is the pandemic. And we're canceling things that probably shouldn't be canceled, that we could be doing. And that we just use that as an excuse. We don't seize the opportunity. Think about how many opportunities you may have had that were there. You know, a lot of times when people are offered a new job, for example, that's pretty common. You're offered a new job, and it may be better, but you hesitate, you wonder, I feel comfortable here. We're complacent. Sometimes we remain mediocre, and we just stay there when we're being given an opportunity. And bartimaeus, he reminds us to take the chance, to go out, to do it. You don't want to be on your deathbed thinking, I should have done that 30 years ago. Don't go there. Don't do that. And bartimaeus is a good teacher to remind us, go for it. Learn how to take the chance and don't hesitate. We know it that sooner or later we're going to regret it. We're going to say, I should have done. How many times we say that? You know, I should have done that. And yet we didn't take the chance because we feared, we held back. Bartimaeus did. Hopefully, I'm sorry if I woke you up when I shouted, but hopefully you remember that shout, because that's what he did. That's what Bartimaeus did. He wanted to call the attention of Jesus. First lesson of our good teacher, Bartimaeus. Second lesson, he calls Jesus Son of David. And that's interesting. Son of David is a messianic type. David, King David, the Messiah, was going to come from the root of David. You see, from Jesse's tree. And when he calls Jesus Son of David, Bartimaeus is being very smart. He knows how to capture the attention of the Lord. The Lord sees that here's someone that is giving him a title that he rightly had, and that this man, even though he was externally blind, he had that interior vision of knowing who he was talking to and what he could ask of him. That's coming. Not yet. That's coming. But he could address him in a way that captures the attention of the Lord. And if you remember last Sunday's gospel, it was John and James, the sons of Zebedee. They asked Jesus, by the way, is after the same question. If you remember, Jesus asked Bartimaeus today, what do you want me to do for you? That was the exact question he asked James and John last Sunday. What do you want me to do for you? What did they ask? We want to sit one at your right and one at your left. And Jesus doesn't even bother to answer that. He says, that's not for me to do it. He goes into another topic because James and John, they asked for the wrong thing to the wrong person. That was not for him to do. Bartimaeus, in contradiction or contrary to that, asks the right question to the right person and addresses who this person is. The Son of David, a messianic type. Second lesson, he's very smart. He knows how to pray and what to pray for. And that's very important that we learn that too. As we ask for things, the first thing we have to ask is, this is not for selfish reasons, but this is because it is what you have taught me. When we talk to the Lord, this is what I have received from you. This is according to your will. This is for my salvation. You see, when we pray like that, what else can the Lord do but give us what we're praying for? So we learn from Bartimaeus how to pray for what is rightly prayerful or needed to be prayed for, and that we recognize who is it that we're praying to. And unlike James and John, who didn't know what they were asking, they were asking for something that they shouldn't have been asking for. Bartimaeus knows exactly what he wants, which brings us to the third point. So not only he is bold and takes a risk, not only he knows how to pray and how to capture the attention of the Lord, but now he's going to state the obvious. Have you known people like that always state the obvious? I think we know people like that. Sometimes we tease them. I remember we have a classmate in the seminary, when I was in seminary, he always had the ability to state the obvious. And we used to joke with him, Dale, can you say something a little more productive, a little more intriguing? He would say things like in a class, well, we're here to learn as much as we can. Duh. Well, of course, that's what you're here for. Can you say something more? That's the obvious. And we used to tease him because he always used to state the obvious. But in prayer, it's okay to state the obvious. Actually, we should always state the obvious to the Lord. And Jesus asked Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? Remember, James and John, they had the wrong answer. Not what you need to ask. Bartimaeus had the right answer to that question. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus wants to elicit, because it's obvious what he needs. But Bartimaeus doesn't say, well, can you give me a couple of coins so that I can have a coffee tonight? No, he doesn't. He goes for it. He goes for the whole thing. He says, Lord, I want to see. I'm blind. Can't you see that I'm blind? Jesus knew. He's a blind man sitting by the road, but he asks for the obvious. And I think that's a great lesson. Bartimaeus, good teacher that he is, he teaches us in prayer, say what you need. Why do we have to hide our desires? I like that word, our desires in prayer. No, talk to the Lord from your heart, from what you need. Sometimes, and I know this can be risky, because if you live with other people in the same house, if you're walking out in the street, you don't want to talk out loud. People may think that you have some psychological problem. If you're talking by yourself out there, they will say something about your mental well-being. But I find that praying out loud, it's a very good exercise. When you talk to the Lord, talk it out, express it out, share with Him the obvious. Whatever is happening in your life, why is it so difficult to put it into words? You know what's happening, so express it to Him, talk to Him, mention it to Him. As we're talking out loud, we're listening to ourselves too. And more importantly, everything you receive is the Lord talking to you. Some people say, Father, God doesn't speak to me. Well, God's speaking to us all the time, but we don't realize that we're not going to, most of the time, hear an audible voice, something that we actually hear, like someone talking. Some people may, and some people have. That's kind of like a locution. People do have locutions from God, and they hear a voice. Most people don't. But as we are praying, as we are sharing with God the obvious, what's happening, what I'm going through, my family, my work, my co-workers, whatever it may be, as we're talking to Him, things come to our mind. We get things. Things come to our heart, and that's God speaking to us. And Bartimaeus, good teacher that he is, by stating the obvious, Lord, I want to see. He teaches us that in prayer, we are called to state the obvious to God. Tell Him where you're coming from, what's going on, what's happening. That's okay. And listen. He will speak in your heart. So as we do that, we begin to realize that it's not so much the theory that we can learn from Bartimaeus, but the fact that he actually did it. He went out and did those three things, and he becomes a great teacher. In the gospel it says that after he had asked for that, the Lord said, go, your faith has saved you. And then immediately, that's a favorite word of Mark. In Mark's gospel, you have that word all the time. Everything happens immediately in the gospel of Mark, and he regains his sight. Here he is standing in front of the Lord, and you imagine what that moment was like? That all of a sudden his eyes clear out, and he can see Jesus. He had just been hearing a voice, and now he sees a face. And from that moment on, he follows him, says the gospel today. And who wouldn't? I mean, if you would have been blind and you get your sight back, you would live the rest of your life next to the man who gave you your sight. So probably Bartimaeus, I like to call him Saint Bartimaeus. He was a saint. He followed Jesus. He did what he was called to do, and today he becomes a great teacher of prayer and of life to each one of us. Don't let opportunities pass you by. Take them. He took them. He thought, this may be my last chance. I may never see Jesus of Nazareth again. When you go to him, learn how to speak to him. Learn to talk to God with what he can give you. It certainly has to be according to his will and according to our salvation. So that's the end goal of every human life. So he's going to tell you, like James and John, that's not for me to give. Sorry, you're asking for the wrong thing. But we have to learn how to pray for the things that he wants and for the things that bring us to salvation. And finally, learn to state the obvious in prayer. Don't feel silly. Don't feel like a fool. Don't feel like, well, God should know. No, apparently he likes that. He likes us to know, because Bartimaeus, it was obviously what he needed, and yet the Lord asked, what do you want me to do for you? I don't know how he said that. Was he serious? Was he kind of smiling a little bit? Because he knew what he needed, but he wanted Bartimaeus to express it, to mention it, to put it out there, and then the great miracle happened. So, my brothers and sisters, let us learn from St. Bartimaeus. Let us enact that in our own lives. And as we leave today, hopefully, we can leave not just with our physical sight, but that we have been helped today to regain our spiritual sight, which is much more important than our physical sight. Amen.